It's called Beyond Order, Another 12 Rules for Life. And I thought maybe I'd start by telling you what those next 12 rules are. The idea is this. The first book was an antidote to chaos, and it was an attempt to explain that, while we need a certain amount of order, what we need more than order even, though, is a balance between order and chaos. And so I'm trying to represent that in the juxtaposition of the two books. The first one was published as a white cover, and this one will be published with a black cover. So that'll be a nice juxtaposition. So here's some of the new rules. So the first one is, do not carelessly denigrate social institutions or creative achievement. I like that one because you're more prone to carelessly denigrate social institutions if you're liberal, on the left side of the spectrum, let's say, because you're interested in lateral thinking and spontaneity and novelty and leery of what would you say, structures that constrain. And then if you're more on the center or the right, you're more likely to denigrate creative achievement because, well, the creative types, they're always moving laterally and breaking things apart. And I mean the genuinely creative types, the ones who are on the avant-garde, and they're a bit of a threat to social institutions. But the truth of the matter is that you need both. If you're a conservative person, you can't denigrate creative achievement because a certain amount of it is necessary just to keep things stable. And if you're a conservative, you're interested in stability. You think, well, I wish things could stay the same. It's like, nope, not going to happen. You don't even stay the same, right? You sit there and you think, I'm just going to stay the same. And you don't. You get old. And it right. I mean, it just happens. And because of that, you have to update. And it's the creative types that do the updating. Now, that can get out of hand, and things can, you can get so many people, creative people, destabilizing the current situation so that nothing is reliable. And that untrammeled creativity can be a destructive force. That's its danger. But it's necessary to respect cultural institutions and also to respect the process that updates them. And so that's what that chapter is about. Rule 2. Imagine who you could be and then aim single-mindedly at that. See, I like that one. The single-mindedly part is an interesting one. I learned this at least in part from Nietzsche. Is, when you're a kid, in principle, you could be anything, which is kind of one of the wonderful things about being a kid. And then one of the painful things about growing up and being an adult is that, well, you can't just stay being everything. So, you have to make a sacrifice when you grow up. You have to become something. And to become something means to not become a whole bunch of other things. Like, it's a sacrifice. But the thing about the sacrifice is that you end up with something rather than nothing at all. And I've seen lots of people in my clinical practice, who didn't grow up when they should have, and who are 30, which isn't too bad, although it's not that good, but 40, they're still drifting. They still haven't catalyzed an identity of any sort. And that starts to get ugly. Pick something. You don't know what to do. Well, take your best damn shot at it. Don't wait around, man. Make a plan. Aim at something. Move in that direction. Adopt a disciplinary routine of some sort, because that will form you. Now, it limits you too, but it forms you. And then it also increases the probability that you're going to do something useful over the long run. Rule 3. Do not hide unwanted things in the fog. You know how it is when something's up and you don't want to think about it? Your emotions hint at you that something isn't the way it should be. And then you can remain unconscious merely by not attending to that. Think, I don't want to think about that. It's like, yeah, well, no wonder. But what are you going to do? You're going to wait. You're going to collect all these errors around you, right? An immense number of unsolved errors. You do that long enough and your whole life is just a morass of unsolved errors. And then you really won't want to think about it. And then you're really done. Imagine that you're wandering through the fog and there's pits that you could fall into, and that there's knives that you could impale yourself on. There's sharp edges everywhere. It's like, well, that's terrible. It's terrible that the world's full of pits and sharp edges and knives hidden in the fog. It's like, well, yeah, but what if you disperse the fog? Well, then the pits are still there, and so are the sharp edges and the knives, but you don't have to fall into them because you can just walk around them. And that's another reason why it's so useful to face things. It's like, well, it turns out that it's much more probable that you can deal with it. It's much better than waiting at home in your bed quivering while the thing grows and comes in and eats you. Because then for sure you lose. And that's pretty much how life works.
Rule 4.
Notice that opportunity lurks where responsibility has been abdicated. That's a very, very cool thing to know, is that there's responsibility for setting the world right that lays all around you. And you can tell that because things bother you about the world. Right? They prey on you, and they might even undermine your faith in existence itself because things aren't set right, But then that's a voice inside of you that says, well, there is a right and things could be set that way, because why would you be bothered otherwise? It wouldn't disturb you, but it does disturb you, and it's because you've got an ethical core. And when you're disturbed by the fact that things aren't set right, that's actually a call to you to set them right. It's a call to adventure, and it's a call to opportunity.
Rule 5.
Do not do things that you hate. It's the same as lying. It's the acting out of a lie. Lies will come back to haunt you. And the same thing happens when you do things that you hate. It's the behavioral equivalent of a lie. It will absolutely come back to haunt you. And if you're in a situation where you're required to do that for whatever reason, well, that's terrible for you. And maybe there's no way out of it or no simple way out of it, but you're gonna be punished for it. And not least by yourself, not least by the degeneration of your character, which is a terrible thing because you actually need your character in order to survive.
Rule 6. Abandon ideology.
Stay away from the ideological idiocies and simplicity and oversimplifications and try to put yourself together, because I do believe at the most fundamental level, and I think this is the remarkable realization of Western civilization, is that the well-developed individual is the antidote to the tyranny of society and biology. I think that's our great discovery in the West. It's not like other cultures haven't had that idea in nascent form, but it's been hyper-developed in the West, and I think it's right. And so we abandon that pathway of divine individuality and revert to ideological identification of race or sex. We're going to tear each other apart. And I think part of the reason we're motivated to do that is because many people don't want to bear the responsibility of developing themselves as individuals. So they'll shuffle off the responsibility, and if that means that, we're dancing in the streets because everything's on fire, that'll be just fine. And that's another thing that's adding to the terrible danger that we're in right now.
Rule 7. Work as hard as you possibly can on at least one thing and see what happens.
One of the things you want to discover when you're young, or one of the things you want to discover at some point in your life, it's better to discover it when you're in your 20s, I think, is, well, just how hard can you work on something? Like if you pick something, I don't care what it is, again, you think, I'm going to go flat out on this and see what happens. And that's also useful too, because there's no other way of really discovering your limits, right? And you kind of want to know what your limits are. I think one of the things you need to do in your life at some point is push yourself farther than you can go. So you kind of push yourself past the point of exhaustion. Think, oh, that's good. There's the point of exhaustion. Well, you can't stay there, because if you stay at the point of exhaustion for any length of time, well, then, you'll degenerate, right? Because that's just too much. But you can find that point, and then you can pull back, and you can think, okay, well, I can't go farther than that. I kind of know where my limit is now. I can pull back, and I can operate within that limit, but then at least you know where your limit is.
Rule 8.
Try to make one room in your house as beautiful as possible. That's a fun one, because it's very beauty. It is a bit of a meditation on beauty, In some sense, to encounter something beautiful is also to become aware of all the ways that you're not that. And so it's to dare to encounter an ideal that shames you, I would say. And it's partly why people are afraid of beauty, but beauty is also a window into, I don't know exactly, it's a window into something transcendent. Could you take something that's merely organized and functional and elevate it to the next level? Could you dare to interact with something that's beautiful? Could you reach that high? And if you dare to engage with beauty, then it serves as a reminder that you're connected to something that's beyond your comprehension all the time. Rule 9 is if old memories still make you cry, write them down carefully and completely. If something's bothering you from the past and you think about it, still makes you upset, part of you's stuck back there. There's part of your soul that's stuck back there, and you need it in the present. You're lesser than you should be. But if you write them down, if you write the memories down, if you thoroughly assess them and analyze them, try to understand what went wrong and how that might not be duplicated in the future.
Rule 10.
Plan and work diligently to maintain the romance in your relationship. The first part of that sentence is a lot different than the second part. Plan and work diligently. Okay, that's sort of one conception, that's for sure, one conceptual realm. To maintain the romance in your relationship. It's like, no, those things don't go together, but they do. Life gets in the way. If you both have a job and you have little kids, it's, maybe you have some other responsibilities. It's very easy for the romantic part of your relationship to fall to priority 11 on a list of 1 to 10, and you never get to it, And the romance in a relationship that's long-term is an art. It has to be fostered. It has to be invested in. And the rule of thumb that I've discovered, just two of them, is if you want to have a successful long-term relationship, one is you got to talk to each other for 90 minutes a week. That's really painful. And that takes about 90 minutes a week of just, some of that's just practical communication too, about what has to happen in the household, what has to happen with the kids, and what's going on with the career, and why the car needs to be fixed, just the mundane realities of the domestic economy. That has to be discussed, and you need 90 minutes of that, or you fall behind and you get separated. And then you need the same amount of time devoted to something approximating intimacy and romance. It's like, how much pleasure is there in life? There's a handful of pleasures. That's all. And they're easily foregone. And then they're gone. Better to plan and work diligently to maintain them.
Rule 11. Do not allow yourself to become resentful, deceitful, or arrogant. And the point of the chapter, at least in part, is that even if you have reasons for all of those three things, especially resentment, because people often have extraordinarily difficult lives, going down that path is likely to make everything worse. And that's a non-trivial problem, because if you're suffering dreadfully, then it's very difficult to resist the temptation of resentment. So it's something I've certainly struggled with, that rule in Rule 12, be grateful in spite of your suffering. Say, well, one of the things that you want to do is practice gratitude. That's one of the primary religious rituals, you might say, is the practice of gratitude. And you might say, well, my life is so horrible, what do I have to be grateful for? And I would say that's for better or worse, that's still a form of blindness, right? I mean, people can have very, very difficult situations, can be in very, very difficult situations. And it's in those difficult situations where the search for gratitude becomes something that is by necessity deeper and more difficult. But that doesn't mean it's not appropriate. You are morally obligated to maintain faith no matter what happens to you. And there's a practical side to that. If you think things are bad just because they're bad, you wait till you see how bad they can become if you allow yourself to be corrupted by your unjust suffering, right? And so I do think that this is the most practical possible advice that can be given to people, which is that you are morally required to maintain faith, to aim up, and to treat other people the way you would want to be treated, no matter what's happened to you.